I attended the wedding of my son, whom I raised as a single father, but my nameplate said, low-educated fake dad. The bride's highly educated family burst out laughing. But when I tried to leave, my son said, Dad, let's go home. The next day, an unbelievable thing happened at their company. I stood at the back of the luxurious ballroom, straightening my ill-fitting suit. It was my son's wedding day, a day I had dreamed about for 2 decades, ever since his mother walked out and left me to raise him on my own. I worked 2 jobs, fixed toilets during the day, delivered groceries at night. The suit itself told a story I wished it didn't. I bought it 3 years ago for my neighbor's funeral, the only formal event I'd attended in years. The sleeves were slightly too long, the shoulders a bit too broad, and despite my best efforts with an iron that had seen better days, the wrinkles seemed determined to announce my discomfort to anyone who cared to look. I'd practiced this moment in my head countless times. Walking into that ballroom, seeing Jason in his tuxedo, maybe getting emotional during the vows. What I hadn't practiced was feeling so utterly out of place among these people who spoke in hushed, educated tones about wine vintages and European vacations. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. Women in evening gowns that probably cost more than my monthly rent glided past, their jewelry catching the light from crystal chandeliers. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos discussed stock portfolios and vacation homes with the casual confidence of people who'd never worried about making rent. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged, exactly what to say, exactly how to hold their champagne flutes. I found myself studying their movements, trying to decode the subtle social signals that seemed as natural to them as breathing. The way they laughed, not too loud, never too long. The way they held conversations, never focusing on just one person, always ready to gracefully shift to someone more important. The way they looked at me, politely, briefly, then quickly away, as if eye contact might somehow contaminate them. There were times we had no heat in winter, but I never let him go hungry. Never missed a parent-teacher meeting. And now? Here we were. Hundreds of guests, chandeliers glowing, champagne flowing, and a 6-tier cake that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The memories of those early years flooded back as I watched the opulent display around me. I remembered the winter when Jason was 8, when the heating bill was higher than my rent and I had to choose. We wrapped ourselves in every blanket we owned and I told him we were camping indoors. He believed me, or at least pretended to, making s'mores over the stove and telling ghost stories by flashlight when the power got cut off. I remembered the Christmas when I worked double shifts for 3 weeks straight, delivering groceries to families who tipped me with crumpled dollar bills, just so I could afford the bicycle Jason had been staring at through the toy store window. The look on his face Christmas morning made every aching muscle, every exhausted drive through the snow, worth it. Those were the times when other kids had 2 parents at school events, when Jason would sit alone at father-son activities because I was fixing someone's broken sink across town. But somehow, he never complained. Never made me feel like I wasn't enough, even when I felt it myself every single day. I wasn't comfortable in this world. But I was proud. Until I saw the place card. The moment I approached the family table, I should have known something was off. The other guests were already seated, and there was an unusual cluster of people from the bride's side standing nearby, their conversations dying to whispers as I approached. Someone's phone was discreetly pointed in my direction, as if they were expecting something to happen. At the family table, right beneath the golden father of the groom label, was my name, followed by a phrase someone had added in mock cursive with a gold pen, low-educated fake dad. I blinked. Surely, a joke? But then came the laughter. From the bride's side. Her father, a retired university dean, snorted with a smug smile. Her mother covered her mouth, failing to suppress a giggle. One of her cousins whispered something to another, and they both looked at me and laughed louder. The laughter wasn't just cruel, it was orchestrated. I could see it in their faces, the way they'd been waiting for this moment, probably planned it during their pre-wedding family dinner. The bride's mother, Dr. Patricia Westbourne, a woman who'd introduced herself to me exactly once with a limp handshake and a forced smile, was now covering her mouth with jeweled fingers, her shoulders shaking with barely contained mirth. Her father, Gregory, was worse. He didn't even try to hide it. This was a man who'd spent 40 years in academia, who'd written papers on social dynamics and human behavior, and here he was, publicly humiliating a working man at his own son's wedding. The irony was lost on him, but it wasn't lost on me. Heat rose up my neck. I looked around for my son, Jason. He was standing by the dance floor, smiling as the photographer snapped pictures of him and his new in-laws. He hadn't seen it. He couldn't have seen it. But even as I told myself that, something nagged at me. Jason had always been observant, even as a child. When he was 12 and I'd come home from particularly difficult days, he'd somehow know to make me a sandwich or suggest we watch a movie together. He noticed things. How could he not notice this? I quietly turned the nameplate over and tried to sit, but the laughter didn't stop. Then I heard it. Well, what did you expect? He fixed his pipes. Probably didn't even graduate high school. The voice belonged to Emily's aunt, a woman who'd barely acknowledged my existence during the rehearsal dinner. She was speaking just loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. It was a skill these people had perfected, the art of the polite insult, the socially acceptable cruelty. I heard he lives in the same apartment where he raised Jason, another voice chimed in. Can you imagine? His son could probably buy and sell that entire building now, and the father's still there, probably can't afford anything better. Each word was a knife. Not because they were necessarily wrong. I did still live in that apartment. I hadn't finished high school. I did fix pipes for a living. The cruelty was in the delivery, in the assumption that these facts made me less worthy of respect, less deserving of basic human dignity on what should have been one of the proudest days of my life. But what hurt most wasn't their mockery, it was the casual nature of it. This wasn't anger or passion, it was entertainment. They were amusing themselves with my pain, treating my life's work and sacrifices as a punchline to share over cocktails. To them, I wasn't a person with feelings, dreams, and dignity. I was a curiosity, a conversation piece, evidence of their own superiority. I thought about all the years I'd wondered if I was enough for Jason. All the nights I'd lain awake worrying that my lack of education, my blue-collar job, my small apartment would somehow hold him back or embarrass him. I'd pushed him to excel academically partly because I wanted him to have opportunities I'd never had, but also because I was afraid that if he didn't rise above his circumstances, people would judge him the way they were judging me now. Ironic, then, that his success had brought him into contact with exactly the kind of people I'd spent years being afraid of, people who would reduce a man's worth to his job title and bank account. My stomach twisted. I stood up, ready to walk out. But just as I turned to leave, a firm hand grabbed mine. It was Jason. He looked at me, serious, quiet, but with something burning in his eyes. "Dad," he said, "let's go home." I hesitated. "Jason, your wedding." I said let's go home. The music stopped. The DJ froze. Guests turned. He looked at his bride, at her family, and said clearly, "You all just made the biggest mistake of your lives." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stood frozen in her wedding dress, a vision in white silk and confusion. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock in her eyes. This wasn't part of the script. Her family had orchestrated their little humiliation, but they hadn't planned for this response. Gregory Westbourne rose from his chair, his face reddening. "Now see here, young man. This is highly inappropriate. You're embarrassing your bride on her wedding day." Jason turned to face him, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man he'd become, confident, controlled, dangerous when provoked. "No, Gregory. You embarrassed my father. You embarrassed the man who worked himself to the bone so I could become someone worthy of your daughter. And in doing that, you embarrassed me." The wedding guests, hundreds of them, watched in stunned silence as my son, the groom, walked toward the exit with his father. Emily called his name once, her voice breaking, but he didn't turn around. He didn't explain, didn't yell, just walked out with me into the cold night. And the next day, everything changed. The ride home was silent, except for the quiet of the city night. My son drove, eyes fixed on the road, jaw clenched tight. He hadn't said a word since we left the wedding. Not until we reached the apartment, the same one I had raised him in, the same one I still lived in, even though he now had the means to live far, far better. The familiar sounds of our neighborhood filled the silence, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere, the hum of the old elevator in our building that had been making the same grinding noise for 15 years. This place held so many memories. The kitchen table where Jason had done his homework every night, where I'd helped him with math problems I barely understood myself. The living room where we'd watched every basketball game his high school team played, where he told me about his first job, his first girlfriend, his dreams of starting his own company. I'd offered to move out when Jason graduated college, told him he could have the place to himself. But he'd insisted I stay. "It's home, Dad," he'd said. "Why would either of us want to leave home?" At the time, I thought it was just sentimentality. Now I wondered if there had been something more calculated about that decision. As I reached to unlock the door, he finally spoke. "You know, Dad, I saw it." I froze. "The nameplate. I saw it before you did. I was watching from the side. I was waiting to see what you'd do." I turned confused. "Then why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you say something sooner?" He looked at me, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Pain. "Because I wanted to know if they'd do it, if they'd really humiliate you, the man who raised me on the most important day of my life. And they did." The weight of that revelation hit me like a physical blow. My son had been testing them. Testing the people he was about to call family. And they had failed spectacularly. "I've been watching them for months, Dad. Emily's family. The way they talked about you when they thought I wasn't listening. The way they'd changed the subject whenever your work came up. The way Emily would get embarrassed when I mentioned how proud I was of what you'd accomplished." He sat down heavily on our old couch, the same one we'd bought secondhand when he was 10. "Do you remember when I brought Emily here for the first time? Last Christmas?" I nodded. It had been awkward. Emily had smiled and complimented the apartment, but I'd seen her eyes taking inventory of everything that was old, everything that was small, everything that didn't match her world. She spent the whole drive back to her parents' house talking about how quaint this place was. How authentic. Like we were some kind of museum exhibit. Like you were some character in a story about overcoming poverty instead of just my dad. The pain in his voice was unmistakable. I realized then that Jason had been carrying this burden for months, watching the woman he thought he loved slowly reveal her true feelings about the man who had raised him. No wonder he'd seemed distant during the wedding planning, distracted during family dinners. "I kept making excuses for her," Jason continued. "Telling myself she was just nervous about meeting you, that she'd warm up once she got to know you better. But it got worse, not better. She started suggesting that maybe you didn't need to be at the rehearsal dinner, that we could have a smaller, more intimate ceremony. When I asked what she meant, she said it would be easier if we didn't have to worry about differences in background. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. The same feeling I'd had at Jason's high school graduation when I'd sat alone while other families filled entire rows. The same feeling I'd had at parent-teacher conferences when other parents discussed their children's college prospects with easy confidence while I worried about how we'd afford even community college. That's when I started the investigation, Jason said quietly. If Emily's family thought they were better than us, I wanted to know exactly what kind of people they really were. Jason pulled out his phone, tapped something, and handed it to me. It was a video, recorded secretly. The bride's father laughing as he handed the pen to one of the cousins, her mother joking about trailer trash walking among us, and worst of all, Jason's bride herself, nodding. My real father is the man I'm marrying, she had joked. That plumber guy? He's just a formality. The video was timestamped from earlier that afternoon. They'd planned this. They'd actually sat around and planned to humiliate me at my son's wedding. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. But there was more. The video continued, showing Emily's mother suggesting they could handle me by seating me at a back table, maybe with the other service people. Her father had laughed and said the nameplate idea was perfect because it would put him in his place without being technically actionable. They'd talked about me like I wasn't human. Like I was a problem to be managed rather than the father of the groom. My heart sank. But Jason, he was calm, ice cold. Dad, I didn't tell you this before, but I never signed the prenup. I blinked. You didn't? He shook his head. They begged me to. Her father even offered to invest in my startup if I signed it. But, I had already built something by then, quietly, with a friend, a tech security firm. That's why I kept living simply. I didn't want to draw attention. This was news to me. I'd known Jason was working on something technology-related, but he'd always been vague about the details. I'd assumed it was just another job, maybe a little better paying than most, but nothing extraordinary. You remember my college roommate, Marcus? The computer science major who used to eat dinner with us sometimes when he'd visit? I nodded. Marcus had been a quiet kid, brilliant but awkward, the type who could fix any computer problem but struggled with small talk. We kept in touch after graduation. Started working on something together in our spare time. Cybersecurity software for small businesses. Nothing flashy, just practical tools that worked. We bootstrapped it for 3 years, working nights and weekends, reinvesting every penny. He paused, then continued. 2 years ago, we were acquired. Clean deal. I made enough money to be very comfortable, but more importantly, I learned how business really works. How to read financial statements, how to identify struggling companies, how to make strategic investments. The number he mentioned was substantial but believable, enough to live well and make smart investments, but not the impossible fortune the original story implied. Now I was the one sitting down. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Jason's expression softened slightly. Because I didn't want it to change anything between us. I didn't want you to feel like you had to be proud of me because of money. You'd already taught me everything I needed to know about being a man, about working hard, about treating people with respect. The money was just a byproduct. But his expression hardened again when he continued. What I didn't expect was how Emily's family would react when they started digging into my finances. They hired a private investigator, Dad. Did background checks on both of us. They knew exactly how much I was worth, and they were determined to protect what they saw as their daughter's inheritance. Jason's eyes narrowed. They thought they were marrying a fool with new money who could be controlled and managed. But what they didn't realize is that I had been watching them just as carefully. And I discovered some very interesting things about their family business. I stared at him, stunned. This was a side of my son I'd never seen, calculating, strategic, almost ruthless. It scared me a little, but I couldn't deny feeling a surge of pride. He'd learned to play chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He opened his laptop and began typing furiously. I've been preparing for this possibility for months. Ever since I realized what kind of people they really were. I kept hoping I was wrong, kept hoping they'd show some basic decency when it mattered. The screen filled with documents, but not what I expected. Instead of corporate takeover plans, these were detailed financial reports, investigative findings, and what looked like evidence files. Westbourne Hospitality Group isn't just struggling, Dad. They've been committing fraud. Embezzling from their own pension fund, falsifying tax returns, bribing health inspectors at their restaurants. I've been working with a forensic accountant for the past 6 months, documenting everything. My stomach dropped. You've been investigating them? I had to. When they started treating you like dirt, I needed to understand who these people really were. What I found was a family that's been breaking the law for years, thinking their social status would protect them. Jason pulled up a series of documents. Tomorrow morning, these files go to the IRS, the Department of Labor, and the FBI. By tomorrow evening, Westbourne Hospitality will be under federal investigation. Within a week, the company will be bankrupt and Gregory will be facing criminal charges. Tonight confirmed everything I suspected. They don't see you as a person, Dad. They see you as an embarrassment. Something to be hidden or managed or mocked. Tomorrow, they're going to find out who they really tried to humiliate. And when I'm done, the Westbourne family will wish they never mocked the man who raised me. The next morning Jason was already dressed in a sharp navy suit by the time I walked into the kitchen. Coffee brewed silently behind him, untouched. Dad. Today's the day they learn who you really are to me. Not some fake dad. but the man who made me who I am. He handed me a folder. Inside were financial reports, bank statements, and what looked like official government documents. The bride's family business, Westbourne Hospitality Group, a chain of luxury hotels and restaurants, had been hiding serious financial crimes for years. It started as simple due diligence, Jason explained, pouring himself coffee with steady hands. When Emily and I got serious, I wanted to understand her family's business. What I found was much worse than just poor management. He spread out evidence across our small kitchen table. Embezzlement from employee pension funds, falsified tax returns, systematic bribery of health inspectors and city officials. They'd been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a respectable business. I studied the documents. Even to my untrained eye, the evidence looked damning. Bank transfers to offshore accounts, forged documents, recorded conversations. How did you get all this? I hired professionals. Former FBI investigators, forensic accountants, people who know how to build airtight cases. It took 6 months and cost me a significant portion of my savings, but I had to know who these people really were. Jason pulled out another set of documents. This morning, all of this evidence gets delivered simultaneously to the IRS, the FBI, the Department of Labor, and the State Attorney General's office. By this afternoon, federal agents will be knocking on Gregory Westbourne's door. The plan was methodical and legal. Instead of trying to destroy them through some impossible corporate takeover, Jason had simply documented their crimes and was turning them over to the proper authorities. I could have confronted them privately, Jason explained, carefully organizing the files. Could have threatened to expose them unless they apologized to you. But that would have been about revenge, and you didn't raise me to be vengeful. You raised me to believe that actions have consequences, that people who break the law should face justice regardless of their social status. I looked at my son with new understanding. This wasn't the angry reaction of a hurt child, this was the measured response of a man who had learned right from wrong at a kitchen table in a small apartment, from a father who had always insisted that character mattered more than wealth. The hardest part, Jason continued, was pretending everything was normal these past few months. Sitting through family dinners listening to Gregory lecture about business ethics while knowing he was stealing from his own employees. Watching Emily's mother donate money to charity galas while she was evading taxes. Pretending to respect people who had no respect for anyone, including themselves. The weight of what my son had been carrying became clear. He'd been living a double life, the devoted fiancé by day, the determined investigator by night. All while protecting me from the knowledge that would have broken my heart months earlier. They thought they were untouchable because of their social connections, Jason said, straightening his tie. But fraud is fraud, regardless of how many charity galas you attend. 10:30 a.m. Federal Building downtown. Jason walked into the FBI field office with me beside him, carrying boxes of evidence. The federal agents had been expecting us. Jason had arranged this meeting weeks ago, pending the final decision about whether to proceed. Special Agent Rodriguez, a serious woman in her 40s, reviewed the evidence with her team while we waited in a conference room. The documentation was extensive and professionally prepared, the kind of case that prosecutors dream about. Mr. Carter, Agent Rodriguez said finally, this is exceptional work. We've actually been watching the Westbourne family for some time based on anonymous tips, but we never had evidence this comprehensive. She spread out financial charts across the conference table. The pension fund theft alone is enough for federal charges. Add in the tax evasion and the bribery schemes, and we're looking at decades in prison for the primary conspirators. Jason nodded calmly. How long before arrests are made? We'll need a few days to verify some of the documentation and coordinate with other agencies, but I'd say by the end of the week, we'll have warrants. The company's assets will be frozen immediately to prevent them from moving money offshore. Within hours, news vans were parked outside Westbourne Hospitality headquarters. By evening, the story was leading the local news, prominent hotel family under federal investigation for fraud. That night, Jason and I sat on the balcony, watching the news coverage on his tablet. The same people who had mocked me less than 24 hours ago were now being led away in handcuffs. You didn't have to do that for me, I said quietly. He smiled. I didn't do it for you, Dad. I did it because of you. You taught me that actions have consequences, that people who hurt others should be held accountable. You showed me what integrity looks like. My eyes misted. I always believed in you. Even when I didn't understand what you were doing, even when I worried you were working too hard or aiming too high. I believed in you. I know. And that belief, that foundation you gave me, that's what made this possible. Not the money, but the moral compass. You taught me to stand up to bullies, whether they're playground bullies or white-collar criminals. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the distance. Finally, Jason spoke again. Happy late birthday, he added. Next year, we'll celebrate it the right way. I laughed, remembering. My birthday had been 3 days before the wedding, and in all the chaos of final preparations, it had gotten lost in the shuffle. I hadn't minded, Jason's happiness was more important than my birthday. But the fact that he remembered, that he was thinking about making it up to me, meant everything. 3 weeks passed. The news about the Westbourne family's criminal enterprise dominated local headlines for days. Federal agents had raided their offices, frozen their assets, and arrested Gregory, Patricia, and 2 of Emily's uncles on charges ranging from embezzlement to tax evasion to bribery. The headlines were brutal: elite hotel family charged with $1 million fraud. Federal investigation reveals years of criminal activity, and from high society to federal court, the Westbourne scandal. Jason had been questioned by federal agents as a witness, praised for bringing the evidence forward. The investigation had expanded to include other businesses in their network, revealing a web of corruption that went back nearly a decade. As for Emily, she had vanished from social media entirely. Her once carefully curated life of champagne brunches and vacation selfies went silent. Rumors swirled that she was cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for immunity from prosecution. And then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at Jason's door. Emily stood there, drenched from the storm, makeup smeared, wearing jeans and a simple jacket instead of her usual designer clothes. Gone was the polished socialite. In her place stood a woman who looked genuinely broken. "Jason," her voice cracked. "I made a mistake. I was stupid and cruel, and I'm so sorry." Jason stood in the doorway, not inviting her in. "Sorry for what, exactly?" "For everything. For the nameplate. For laughing at your father. For not standing up to my family when they were being horrible." Tears streamed down her face. "I know you'll probably never forgive me, but I had to try to explain." She looked past him and saw me, sitting on the couch behind, reading a book. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. What we did was unforgivable. You raised an incredible man, and we treated you like garbage because we're terrible people." I closed my book and walked to the door. "Emily, I appreciate the apology. But you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry that it all fell apart." She shook her head frantically. "No, that's not true. I've had 3 weeks to think about this. 3 weeks to realize what kind of person I became, what kind of family I come from. You were right about us." Jason's expression softened slightly, but remained guarded. "What do you want, Emily?" "I want to make it right somehow. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I testified against my own family. I told the FBI everything I knew about their business practices. I'm not trying to protect them anymore." She pulled a small envelope from her jacket. "This is a letter I wrote but never sent. I wrote it the day after the wedding, before the arrests, before I knew about the investigation. I want you to read it, but only if you want to." Jason took the envelope but didn't open it. "Emily, even if this letter says everything I'd want to hear, it doesn't change what happened. You stood by and watched your family humiliate my father on what was supposed to be our wedding day." "I know," she whispered. "And I will regret that for the rest of my life." We stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Jason spoke again. "I hope you figure out who you want to be now that you're not part of that family anymore. But I can't be part of that journey with you." Emily nodded, tears still flowing. "I understand. I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. About my family, about me, about what kind of people we really were." She turned to me one last time. "Mr. Carter, I hope someday Jason finds someone who appreciates both of you the way you deserve. You raised a man with more integrity than my entire family combined." And then she walked away into the rain, leaving Jason holding the unopened letter. After she was gone, Jason sat down next to me on the couch. "Do you think I should read it?" I shrugged. "That's up to you. But remember, son, some bridges are burned for good reasons." Jason looked at the envelope for a long moment, then walked over to the fireplace and tossed it in without opening it. Some things are better left in the past. 1 year later, Jason launched a scholarship program for students from blue-collar families. He partnered with the local community college and trade schools, providing full tuition for students whose parents worked in skilled trades, service industries, or manual labor. At the announcement ceremony, when the local news reporter asked, "What inspired this program?" Jason pointed to me in the front row. "That man. The one who was mocked for fixing toilets. The one who taught me that real worth isn't in bank accounts or degrees. It's in integrity, hard work, and treating every person with dignity." The scholarship was modest but meaningful, helping 20 students each year pursue education without the burden of debt I had struggled with throughout Jason's childhood. The recipients weren't required to maintain perfect grades or pursue prestigious careers, they just had to demonstrate the same work ethic and character that Jason had learned from watching me. The applause was warm and genuine. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the richest man in the room, not because of money, but because of the son I had raised and the values we had shared. As for the Westbourne family, Gregory was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Patricia received 5 years. Their business empire was dismantled, with the proceeds going to compensate the employees whose pension funds had been stolen. Emily, who had cooperated fully with the investigation, avoided prosecution but lost everything else: her trust fund, her social status, her sense of identity. Sometimes I wondered if Jason's approach had been too harsh, but then I remembered that nameplate, the laughter, the casual cruelty of people who thought their education and wealth made them better than a man who worked with his hands. Justice, I realized, sometimes comes not through revenge, but through the simple act of proving that character matters more than credentials, and that the love between a father and son is worth more than all the approval of people who were never worthy of it in the first place. 3 months after the scholarship announcement, Jason met Sarah, a teacher at the local elementary school where some of the scholarship recipients' children attended. She had grown up in a family much like ours, working class, proud, and honest. When Jason brought her to dinner for the first time, she complimented my cooking and asked if I could teach her how to fix the leaky faucet in her classroom. I knew immediately that this one was different. This one was worthy of my son. And when they got married 2 years later, my nameplate at the family table read simply, "Father of the groom, Tom Carter." Nothing else needed to be said.